Oh, hello everyone. Hi, jolly good. I can see people coming in. We'll give it I don't know, 30 seconds. As I'm looking, that attendee number is ticking up. So it's very exciting. I hope everyone has had a good session so far. Can't see you. Don't know how many people. I know 31 people are there. I don't know if you've got smiley faces or sad faces, but we will have fun anyway. I'll give it just a little bit because the number's still ticking up. I'll give it just 30 seconds longer to start. How are you, Katie? Are you well?
I'm well, thank you. I'm just recovering from a quick cycle to get here.
Tell everyone what you were doing last night, just while people are coming in. It sounds amazing.
I mean, that is an opener. So last night, actually, I was at the Football Supporters Association Awards in London, which they have every year. They're pretty fun, actually. They were at Nobu last night. But every year they have fans vote on various categories, like podcast of the year, newspaper of the year, etc. Commentator of the year. Ian Wright was on stage last night, I think presenting an award rather than accepting an award. But last night was the first night they've ever introduced a climate action award. And so they'd asked me, we're partnered with the FSA, to present this award. And I'm delighted to say that Bristol City, who were the first professional club to launch the Pledgeball, won that award. Nothing to do, well, no, a little bit to do with the launch of Pledgeball, but also to do with the fact that they have intrinsically embedded environmental sustainability throughout their operations. So it was a very exciting evening.
That's wonderful. Kudos to Bristol City. I'm sure we'll talk about it some more as we go on. Let's get going. We've got until 2:45. So hello everyone. My name is Dave from Climate Outreach. I'm Senior Engagement Advisor. Climate Outreach is an organisation that helps communicators, helps people who are talking about climate change to do it better. If by better we mean bringing more people into the conversation and making them feel that they're connected to it. And it's a real pleasure to be hosting this session. Katie's going to be doing most of the talking, and I'll introduce her in a sec. We were delighted at Climate Outreach to partner with Pledgeball. When was it, Katie? About a year ago now we started, wasn't it? More or less. Helping them think about what was then a new organisation, thinking about how to talk about it, how to frame it, giving them some of our insights, working with them to tell us why our insights wouldn't work, and really genuinely partnering to test in the real world how you engage a particular bunch of people, and that bunch of people in this case being football fans. We're going to talk all about that. You've probably been in sessions all day, so you know how it works. There's two tabs at the bottom. Put chat in. Matt has put a thing in the chat saying hello everyone. If you want to just chat to people, chat in there. If you've got a question for Katie or for me, please use the Q&A tab. I won't be paying attention really to the chat function, so use the Q&A tab to put questions in, and with whatever time we've got, we will ask the most interesting questions. I can't guarantee to ask non-interesting ones, but we will try. A bit of an intro, just 30 seconds from me, so a minute. One of the things we're talking about in this session is how to bring about a transformative shift in mindsets, in engagement, and what that looks like, and just 3 provocations from Climate Outreach really that kind of sums up the work that we do. We want to see more people brought into the climate story and feeling as if they're connected to it, feeling as if action is normal, and feeling as if they can do something about it. To us, that's what the result of better public engagement looks like. So 3 criteria that we encourage when we were working with Katie, we were encouraging Pledgeball to think about, and that I'd encourage you all to think about in your work, is firstly that connection. So how can you, in your engagement, in your communications, make people feel, particularly people who don't normally feel like this, feel as if climate change is their story too, as if they can see themselves in the story, as if it's relevant to their identity, remembering that there's a kind of infinity of climate stories out there, and activist stories, maybe most of us on this call have, is not how most people see this issue. So it's about the language, it's about an emotional story, it's about that sort of instinctive connection with people, so making it tangible and connecting it to things people care about. The second thing is how you can help build a sense that climate action is happening and it's normal and it's not a threat, and that people, quote, like you are doing it. This is why I'm so fascinated by the work that Katie's been doing and the potential of this subject with sport, because there's so much happening, as Katie was just saying, in the world of sport and amongst football fans and sports fans and the conversations they're having. that you just can shine a spotlight on. You can bring that social proof and show that it's happening, make climate action feel normal, and create opportunities to showcase that. And the third thing is the action, giving people a sense that they can do something that to them feels meaningful, so that they will do more stuff. And there's often to be a frustration of people who we might often think we need to get everyone to do everything straight away. And of course, that's not how it works for anyone. It's not how it worked for me. What actions might people do in the different identities, in the workplace, in the football club, in their broader community? How can you encourage them to do something that feels like it means something to them? So that's a bit of an intro. I'm going to hand over to Katie, who's got a few slides. But before that, Katie, introduce yourself, introduce Pledgeball, and I'd love to hear a bit about how the heck you ended up on stage with Ian Wright in the first place. So what's your journey been with this issue?
I mean, thank you. That was a very nice introduction, Dave, and really helpful to set it up for the presentation today as well. This started not as a grand plan to mobilize a lot of people. This started as a result of my own personal journey and those around me, in that when I realized, and those closest to me realized, the true state of things, my response, especially in response to my partner's despair, was to look at what we could do as individuals to have an impact. Now, I then shared that with my football team. I play for a brilliant women's casual league within Bristol. And I shared that with my squad, not really knowing what the response would be, because it was quite early on when I'd first joined them. It was, about 45 women as part of that squad. I didn't know most of them, from all walks of life, but the response was overwhelmingly positive and of interest. I mean, there was a lot of name calling as well, friendly name calling. But now I constantly get sent proof of people carrying out pro-environmental changes. I get questions all the time. And it made me realize that maybe a lot of people do care, but they don't know how to translate that into action. And when you look at the research backs up exactly that. And we'll have a look at that in a minute. Shall I launch then, Dave?
Yeah, please do launch away. And a reminder while Katie's launching that put your questions into the Q&A box, not the chat box, and we shall get to as many as we get to. Katie, when we get to about 1:30, I'll give you a shout if you're still talking. But,
perfect. So I'm going to start with a question for everyone. So there is, if you have phones on you that can use the QR code, please use the QR code. And just very quickly, and I'll come back to this in a minute, could you follow that QR code and give your instant response to how those make you feel? Like, don't give a lot of thought about it, but just put that in, and I will refer back to this in a minute. I'll just give you 30 seconds more to scan that, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, so let's kick off with why it is that we need to bring about a transformative change in thinking and therefore behaviour. And I'm going to start almost backwards. I'm going to start with the behaviour aspect. So when we look at the IPCC report from February, it demonstrated that enabling changes to our lifestyles and behaviour can result in a 40 to 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Now, the key part there is enabling. And this requires a multi-pronged approach. It requires those infrastructural changes, but it also requires the individual agency, the individual drive to make those changes. And of course, that individual drive also feeds into the systemic change that then accelerates, is accelerated through consumer behavior, through voting, etc. How do we bring about a social shift? A social shift in thinking in general. Dave, let me just move you out of the way because I think you're in the way of everybody.
I'm sorry.
When we look at what quantity of people is required to bring about social shift, I think the stat is 3.5% of a population actively protesting brings about a social shift. But simply 25% of people adopting a new social norm also brings about that shift. And here you can see Turf Moor, Burnley's home ground. And the reason I put that there is because Turf Moor's capacity is 27% of Burnley's population. And this is on a very simple level, starts to look at why sport is such a potentially unique platform from which to initiate such a change. So what I want to do then now is, before we look at this question, have a look at the results of that Mentimeter survey that I've sent you. And I do apologise for all the appalling amount of things that are open on my screen. So when we look at this, we've got exactly what I've seen in the past when we've asked this. So we've got obviously overwhelmed, scared, angry,
I can't
hopeless,
see
panic.
that, Katie. I don't
Are you
think-
not seeing that? Oh, sorry. Let me show that again. Here we go. You should be able to see this now. You see that okay now?
Got it.
So as you can see there, the biggest words there, you've got overwhelmed, scared, hopeless, disempowered. And these are really key and really across the board, these are emotions that come back. That kind of messaging is completely paralyzing. And we'll come on to that a little bit more in a second. Let me go back to this one and see if I can reshare this. What I'd like to do now, can you see that okay, Dave?
Yep. You need to put it on present mode again.
Is ask you please then to follow this QR code again, to then say, okay, as a result of what we know there, that kind of messaging is completely paralyzing. What do we need to do then to mobilize people to tackle climate change? So again, I'll give you a couple of minutes just to have a look and have a think about that. There is a huge attitude behavior gap. When we see the research, we can see, as I mentioned at the beginning, on an anecdotal level with my football team, that the majority of people care about climate change and see it as a real issue that they want to be addressed. When we look at football fan specific surveys, it's consistently over 80% of fans who see it as a real problem that needs addressing and want their clubs to take climate action. But, and this goes into what Dave was saying earlier about having a conversation, there is no beautifully successful way of doing this yet. And so it is all about development and working with people and getting people into conversation. So let me skip back then to the results of that Mentimeter survey that you've just put in there. And I will share this again with you in a minute. So on this one, so we've got empower, which is really nice there. Educate, making it easy to act. I really like that and picking up. Okay, so some really interesting ones, and inspire we've got as a big one there as well. So that's come up a lot. So this is really interesting because again, going back to that attitude behavior gap, and I promise I'll stop switching between screens now. Increasing education, according to the research, does not increase action. That doesn't go hand in hand. Instead, we need to move towards that empowerment. So we need to shift the relationship that people have with climate change away from that paralysis to making them feel like as an individual, they can in fact have an impact, and an impact as an individual, but can also see, as Dave mentioned earlier, that they are part of this movement, that other people are also taking action, so that then they are empowered to take that further. Now, just to point out, there is a lot of research out there. So whilst I tell the story about, how this came about in the first instance, as you'll see, because this was something that came up as an idea, we wanted to check that it worked very early on. And we did that through a literary review of the research that was out there. And that includes a lot of the work from Climate Outreach, including Britain Talks Climate, which looks at exactly the ways of engaging different sectors of the population, the things that turn them off, the things that will engage them and inspire them, and also other research around behavior change and more around that transformative shift in thinking, that shifting away from paralysis and into this empowerment, this engagement and desire to do more. Some of these things that came out of our literary research were, move this out of the way again. And again, this harks back to what Dave said. All of the messaging needs to be tailored to the audience. It needs to be part of their own story. It needs to be interactive and as local as possible. So something that suits the community and can be adapted to the community within which they're based. We have to move away from individual action towards collective action. The research is very clear on that in terms of success, in terms of ultimately bringing about behavior change. All too often, people are treated as objects of change. So when we talk, a lot of the time you hear about, for example, clubs saying, we need to educate our fans. Well, your fans probably know way more than you do around this. It's not about education. It's about involving them in the conversation and empowering people. So they are, they are subjects within this. They're not objects to be changed. Actions taken must be visualized to make very clear that you are part of this social movement, because that in itself is empowering. And again, that harks back to those 3 points that Dave makes: the connection, that sense of being part of that group, and then, as we'll go on to in a minute, making clear the actions that you can have and making clear that you are having an impact through those actions. It also requires a really good understanding of the group that you're looking to engage and working with them rather than, as I said, educating them. So for this one, I'd quite like to open it up to the floor in asking why, when we again look at the literary research, why does sport tick so many possible kind of markers of success when it comes to bringing about this transformative change? So Dave, shall I hand over to you to see if we can invite any input here?
Yes. Yeah, I think it'll have to be in the chat box because I don't think we have any other function for doing it. So do just type answers in the chat box. Why is sport a great way to engage people on climate change? Katie, you should be able to see that. Can you popping up in there? Can you see the chat box?
Yeah, shall I?
So Penny says crosses the social spectrum, for example.
Absolutely. It completely transcends all social barriers there. You're right. A huge demographic and huge numbers of people. Absolutely. A commonality between them. That kind of universal feeling, you're all united towards one thing, that incredible collective emotion that you see. Exactly. Engage them through something with which they already feel safe. So it's not extraneous to the sport or extraneous to the activities that they're already involved in, but it's embedding it within that with which they're already emotionally engaged. Okay. I mean, most of my points now have been answered, so we can speed on. So exactly right. Not only are there those key things, so we've got that common emotional engagement, but we've also got the fact that it's regularly part of people's everyday lives and something with which they are emotionally engaged. You know, a lot of people emotionally identify with the club. So you talk about our team. If your team, Dave, performs well on the pitch, I've heard you saying how well you personally did. And it's
like,
that emotion,
like on Saturday against Manchester City, for example.
Yeah, okay. The element of competition, if you play off that, obviously that introduces already that emotional engagement. It's something that people already care about. And fan groups are part of an existing community that already does incredible things. And when we worked with climate outreach, one of the key things that they came back with was make sure that you validate the group with which you are already working. So we've seen the amount of work that fan groups have done that, you know, embedded within the community trusts have, you know, gathered food for food banks. During COVID, they offered a huge amount of support. They do a lot of outreach work. All of this needs to be validated, and it already demonstrates those existing relationships that are there. And one of the key things is that if you can work with both fans and with clubs, so you've got that multi-pronged approach, it allows you to have that peer-to-peer engagement. So whereas the clubs offer a really wonderful platform, what fan groups do and individual fans having conversations with their peers is they provide that resonance, that message that whilst they see it from that kind of unreachable player, that although they see it, they don't necessarily engage with, if your peer says something to you, that's when it resonates and it backs it up. You've got those credible messengers. And again, this is completely taking it from climate outreach. You know, in order to bring about that change, you need these credible messages, that peer-to-peer engagement, and messages that speak to underlying core values. So this is exactly what we try to do at Pledgeball. We play off the characteristics of primarily football, but we also provide a mechanism that can be actually used anywhere, and a lot of other sports have started to use it now as well. That engages people through that with which they're already emotionally engaged. So I will start with explaining the football aspect and then move on to the bit that can be adapted and anyone is free to use anywhere. So the way in which it works with the football clubs, all of the matchday fixtures automatically appear on the website. Each match day, fans go onto the website, they click on their team, and it brings up a registration page. And that registration page provides a series of pledges on there that range from switching to using a reusable cup, to going vegan 2 days a week, to installing solar panels, to writing to your council to ask them to improve recycling services. As that individual makes those pledges, it feeds back what quantity of emissions they will save over the course of a year by carrying those out. That then feeds into the tally bar you can see there. So the team of fans that pledges to save the most emissions wins the fixture, and the tally bar moves in real time depending on which team of fans is in the lead. That then feeds into the Pledgeball league table. And I mean, this is actually from last season. So Bristol City did win it last season, having been the first professional club to launch with us. This season, actually, Bristol Rovers launched with us and are currently sitting top of the table. Having pulled out all the stops with the prizes they're offering this season. This is a comms piece for clubs, but also skipping back to this picture, they also use that in-stadium visibility. So this was at half-time in a Pledgeball derby because it was a Bristol City Birmingham City game. Both Pledgeball clubs, both encouraging fans to pledge. So at half-time, they showed the live score there, and fans had QR codes placed around the stadium, in the toilets, etc., so they could pledge there and then. The key thing that we noticed when we've launched with clubs is it instantly sparks a conversation around climate change. So when we first launched with Bristol City, on their main fan forum, we instantly saw, well, two fans discussing how to turn their washing machine down to 30 degrees because it was a stat that we'd used. Another fan asking what the point was if India and China didn't curb their emissions. And then two other fans bringing in references to research, arguing the point for making these individual changes and explaining why this then has an impact on China's emissions, for example. And that is a key marker of success in terms of bringing these conversations about climate change in spheres where they haven't existed before. The other way in which Pledgeball works is through what we call the Pledgeball events facility. Now, this provides a lot of flexibility. It might be more accurate to call it Pledgeball listings. Anybody can go onto the Pledgeball website and can apply to have a listing on there, and it can be for any period of time. So we had a tap room that decided to offer a free half pint for a certain period of time for anyone who'd made a pledge. Individuals can personalise their listings on there, can write their own descriptions. Here you can see a Birmingham County FA grassroots club, because Birmingham County FA, who are partners with us, invite all of their grassroots clubs to have a listing there, and they have a separate league table that sits on their website. These clubs have a listing for the season, and they have a monthly league table encouraging them to repeatedly pledge, because we want that repeat engagement. But this is a tool that can be used by anybody, so please do feel free to use it. When you register in support of whatever event it is, whether it's to enter a talent show, whether it's to compete against another department within your work, it brings up the same registration page you saw previously, and it then feeds back what quantity of emissions you will save over the course of a year, but as a group, by carrying out those pledges. So that is how Pledgeball works in a nutshell. Now, very briefly, before I hand over to Dave for more discussion, I do want to touch upon a couple of things, and these are usually key questions that come up. Obviously, one of our key things was that we had a very low barrier to entry. What we want to do is to, as I said, introduce these conversations in spheres where they haven't existed before. We, right from the off, wanted to know that this worked. So when we launched with our pilot club in September 2020, we carried out a piece of research to assess, A, the potential for mobilising football fans around climate change, and B, how fans experience Pledgeball at this pilot club. And this was headed up by Dr. Mark Doidge, who's written a lot of papers around mobilising football fans around other social causes, and he's now become a Pledgeball trustee. And his, at the time, master's student, who ended up carrying out her thesis on it, Jenny, who is now our research and development consultant. Now, the findings from that research, we fully expected to have to overhaul a lot of the mechanism, but actually they came back and were incredibly positive and tick off, as I said, a lot of those, I guess, markers of success in terms of bringing about transformative behaviour change. So firstly, they found that it gave those participants an instant raised consciousness, because they'd really enjoyed engaging with that pledge list, because they'd seen things on there that they could already do, and it made the impact of them visible. They'd also seen things on there that they could very easily do, and again, just didn't realise had an impact. But because of that kind of enjoyment and engagement, they'd also seen things on there that they didn't think they could do then, but it introduced that thinking into their minds. So one interviewee gave the example of having pledged to take 5-minute showers, but in so doing had seen the pledge to reduce meat consumption, and that then influenced how he'd gone shopping. Secondly, it shifted people's perceptions of change more generally. So rather than experience it as you know, with a knee-jerk negative response, actually they started to have fun just experimenting with new things. And it made them, more aware of themselves in a broader social context. This harks back again to what Dave said in terms of making visible the fact that you are part of this movement. It made, and I quote, people somehow more optimistic and confident because they could see that they were a part of a community of people taking action and not just fellow fans, but fans across the country from the league table. Irrespective of previous experience, whether activists or completely new to environmental sustainability, everyone found it a really new, motivating and fun way to engage with climate change, but also with each other. And, we saw this through a lot of people voluntarily sharing, say, vegan bakes or recipes through this existing fan group. Voluntarily choosing from a list of behaviours and having that freedom to experiment meant that it was a good enough excuse to start experimenting with some of these changes. And the final thing, which I haven't actually put on here, was that everybody came back saying that they were much more willing, therefore, to engage with material around climate change. So rather than having that cognitive dissonance, that immediate wanting to look away when they see newspaper articles, etc., on it, or voting leaflets, they were much more willing to engage because they felt empowered to do something about it. So, as I said, just to summarize, and before I head back to Dave, in summary, Pledgeball offers a very easy, accessible, and adaptable tool that both engages fans and players, but also any community, as I said, can use this to advocate within their own community, using the language that the community understands and understanding the barriers that face those individuals within the community to carrying out a lot of these pledges. It is proven through this research, and that's exactly how our M&E strategy has continued. And that was in fact evaluated through our partnership with Climate Outreach that was mentioned earlier, which means that it makes it a potentially significant resource in tackling climate change. And just before I hand back, we do use a lot of these stats because although numbers tend to turn people off, we've also had anecdotally some quite positive, a lot of positive feedback around stats like these. We often use them in stadiums. So, one of my go-tos is, because I know Ashton Gate, is, one Ashton Gate's worth of fans simply reducing shower time to 5 minutes equates to taking over 2,000 cars off the road. And what we find is that because people can see that stadium full of people, they can actually envisage it happening. They can envisage, it sounds weird because you're envisaging people taking 5-minute showers, but they can envisage that being a possible. Dave, over to you.
Katie, thank you so much. It's amazing work. It was amazing when I heard of it. It's amazing to have worked with you on it. It's amazing to see it out there. And yeah, that thing about stats is, I remember us working on the stats thing quite a lot. I think what we would suggest with stats is exactly what you're doing. I loved your Burnley stat. A number in and of itself doesn't mean anything. You'll see these things with like X tons of CO2 have been saved by doing a thing. But if you can contextualize that, if you can show if that's a big number or a small number, if you can help people get a handle on it by saying, I love the thing about the 27% of the population of Burnley is in this ground, imagine they all did something. That's how you can do a lot of that bridging between stuff people instinctively get and the bigger picture. So I really love that. There are a couple of questions coming in. Do put a few more in and we will take them. But I wanted to ask you, Katie, about problems, barriers. So you've talked a lot about what's gone well. What are coming to light as potentially stopping this being a bigger thing, stopping wider fan engagement? What are the key barriers you're seeing in this work?
So we're a registered charity. One of the biggest barriers for us was the fact that certainly when we started about 2 years ago, there was no way we could ever have asked a club to pay for this. Because clubs actually, you'll find, are way behind businesses. They haven't had the same regulations as businesses. And so in terms of environmental sustainability, they're actually very new to the game. They also get very concerned about being called out as hypocrites. And so the two key barriers for us has been, funding to a degree. This is why we've gone down the charity route. We don't ask clubs for anything for that basic level. And in fact, we provide draft copy to support them with their comms, because after the work that we've done with you, we have concerns over them writing copy that will turn people off. We provide assets, etc., and obviously free use of the website. But they don't necessarily provide capacity at the moment to address environmental sustainability. So even something that is essentially an off-the-shelf kit that they could use, often they are working season to season, deadline to deadline. You know, the media staff are up until midnight. You know, you're getting messages in asking for copy, etc. And so you're kind of fighting for space to a degree. I think maybe other key barriers probably have been just encouraging uptake and capacity ourselves. But the commercial benefits are starting to be seen, which sounds very shallow. But I think if you're going to get this to roll out more widely, you have to make the commercial case, because that's where the clubs are at. And for the most part, I mean, not across the board, but for the most part. And so you need to make evident that it is commercially beneficial for them to address environmental sustainability.
Yeah, and I was wondering if, forgive me, by the way, I think my connection's a little bit ropey, so sorry if I drift in there. I was wondering how deeply held it is in some of the clubs, like the 2 Bristol clubs that are doing amazingly. Like, what happens if they get a takeover or something? Have you got a sense now that this is something that the fan base will continue to demand action on?
That's a really interesting question. It differs per club, I would say. And I mean, that's one of the exciting things about football, to be honest, is not only do the stories play out on the pitch, but one of the things we found with the clubs is they all have their own stories. So I don't think there's a blanket rule on that one. And also there's not a blanket rule in terms of fan base demanding this, because we've seen different fan bases demanding different things. So you mentioned Burnley earlier again, but they've got an incredible fan group called the Sustainable Clarets, who actually launched with us last year, pushed this. I think they finished 4th in the Pledgeball League last season. And now the club have now adopted Pledgeball as well. So in that instance, they demanded it essentially. The other thing is with the club takeover, I don't know how far down that would filter operationally, because we find that there's not a head of sustainability in clubs. There's very, very few. There's a couple in the Premier League, but not many. So actually the advocates who are pushing this within the clubs are a complete, you know, range of people, from head of ops, there's some directors, but for the most part, it's completely random depending on who personally takes an interest in it.
Fab. I'm going to take a couple of questions that have come in. We've had loads, keep them coming. A question from Matt about whether you've seen any difference in, sorry, I'm reading it from up here, any difference in how clubs engage between men's and women's football. Matt asks, does the surge in success of women's sport in recent years give an opportunity for women's sport to develop in a more socially responsible or better way than men's sport has historically?
That's such a great question. In fact, Tracy Crouch was there last night, who is the MP who headed up the fan-led review of the men's game. So there's a number of things to answer here, so I'll take my time. So firstly, yes, there is a big difference in how the men's and women's comms are pushed out, and it is still a battle for us, I would say, to ensure that there is the same coverage with the women's as there is with the men's. In terms of there being the potential to really embed these things within the women's game, 100%. So we were involved in something called the, I'm going to get the name of this wrong, but the fan-led review of the women's game, the women's, I think it's called the Women's Vision. I can't remember exactly the name, but essentially what this is a review of the governance of the game that the Football Supporters Association are taking to Karen Carney, who's heading it up, to the government, to DCMS, and are looking at introducing regulation. And what we have asked for as Pledgeball, as part of that fan-led review, is that environmental sustainability is part of the club licensing criteria, as it is in the Bundesliga, because then there will start to be the capacity provided, the budget and the resources for clubs to properly address this.
I love that. And there's a related question there from Kathy, who's just come in. Kathy says some sports are introducing sustainability leagues or impact leagues as a parallel competition in sustainability, like a sort of more formal version of what you're doing, I suppose. Can you see football teams adopting it?
So this is really funny. There's a podcast I would highly recommend, by the way, with the broadcaster Jonathan Overend, who has written a podcast, who does a podcast called Emergency on Planet Sport, and he discusses this because Sail GP, which is a sailing race, has an impact league. And what they do is they audit the sustainability of these teams. And they then provide those teams that win with a competitive advantage. Now, currently the fans play no part in that really, or a very small part. It's about the sailing teams themselves, which is fantastic. But we had this discussion with Jonathan, and it's a really interesting one. I still haven't come to a complete answer about it. I think if it would provide a competitive advantage that was not too big a prize, then yes, I think that would be really great. The issue is, particularly with behaviour change and fan engagement, if you offer a prize that's too big, you will get cheating, and they'll start to become bitterness about this. Part of this is that we are trying to initiate this movement that's a really positive thing. And of course you can cheat, because unless you're going to follow somebody 24/7, you don't know if they are continuing throughout their lives to carry out the pledges they promised to make. So there is a really fine balance between continuing to make this a fun and empowering, and yet having that fun competition element, to being something that then becomes hostile and then is negative. So I don't know the answer, but those are the two things I consider in this. And I would suggest, and this is the answer I gave to Jonathan, that what we need instead is to remove some of the competitive advantages that are gained through damaging behaviour, such as flying to away games. So if we across the board said, as Graham Potter called out the other day, said no one should fly anymore to away games, you'd remove that competitive advantage, and instantly you're reducing carbon footprint.
Yeah, which does point, doesn't it, to some things that the governing bodies need to do, as is always the case with this stuff. You know, there are rule changes that would make this easy. There's a question from Matt. I think I've already asked Matt. Anyway, Matt gets another one, which is, what interest is there amongst the governing bodies in general, Sport England, or the FA more widely? You've talked a bit about the women's game, but what other interests?
There is I would say there's quite a lot of interest. So the FA sustainability team, I was lucky enough to be invited to meet at Wembley recently and explain Pledgeball to, and I worked with Birmingham County FA in particular. And the thing that I was particularly impressed about there was that their team so far have only been focused on Wembley itself, but they're looking outside of that. But it was a real cross-departmental work, and they had specific targets that each of those departments, including subcontractors, had to hit. So there is interest, and it is getting there, especially, as I said, because the commercial benefits are becoming evident, and also because fans are calling people out more. I mean, we've seen a lot of comms around the World Cup and their carbon neutrality claims. So it's definitely driving that direction. So yeah, I would say it is exponentially increasing actually in these last 2 years. It's still got a way to go. And what we need to do is continue to challenge people on greenwashing. But it's definitely getting there.
It reminds me of the comment from Mark Steele the other day that this is the world's first human rights neutral World Cup. Going to go around and be nice to people in other places. There's a couple of questions here, so variations on a theme from Holly and Claire, and Dee Roberts' question as well, about what you know about other sports. So you've been looking at football. How easy is it to apply it to other sports, other more formal, less organized? Basically, does the principle hold, do you think, for other types of sport?
Absolutely. So one of the key things, again, harks back to what you said about connection and that peer-to-peer engagement. What we need within Pledgeball, and what we hope to do, is essentially empower and tool up advocates who are based within each of these communities. So our partnership with the Football Supporters Association, I know I'm talking about football again, but this is a prime example of this. We don't understand all of the different barriers that face people within these different communities, because that's impossible. But what we need to do is provide advocates with a way of communicating very easily and in a way that feels safe to encourage others to get on board. And you can do that very easily by saying, let's support so-and-so to do this, or let's compete for this prize. So what I would say is the same criteria for success exist in other sports. You've got that emotional engagement, you've got the regularity, you've got the collective efficacy beliefs, the social norms. What we want is for people to take this mechanism and run with it within their communities in the way that they know they can successfully communicate it. Because then, we're not experts in, as you have suggested, within these other sports, but there is a tool that you can use that will easily engage others using the communications methods that are most successful there.
Yeah, as you said, there'll be some common principles that will in general apply about things people identify with, and then stuff about the sport itself that will need to be, sport specific. But yeah, and are you happy to hear from people if they want to get in touch with their ideas? And
Please do, absolutely.
well, maybe put your email or something into a
I shall do that now.
Stuart's just given me a 5-minute warning. So maybe the last question is from Caroline, which is asking about to what extent, so you talked a lot about people seeing that there are easy actions and beginning to think about the sort of longer ones. To what extent are fans moving beyond those easy ones to the deeper stuff? Have you got evidence on that yet? Is it too early to say? How confident are you that idea worked?
So that's a really interesting question, because this is actually something we're looking at developing, is that journey that we take an individual on from that first engagement, wherever they're at in that journey, to then taking them to the next step, whether that next step is simply a more impactful individual change, or whether that's a change that accelerates systemic change. So, I gave the example of writing to your local council, but there are other things obviously you can do that would accelerate that further. So what we're doing at the moment actually is we're working with a group at Warwick University called 180 Degrees Consulting. And what they are doing are evaluating a lot of different mechanisms that currently exist to engage people. So there are apps out there that obviously support people on their individual journeys. There are various workshops that certain groups run in, for example, Facebook groups that support people around specific behaviours. And what we've asked them to do is to evaluate all of these different mechanisms and the ones that are currently in existence, so that then we can look at either providing more resources ourselves to support people, or to steer them towards these ones that we know work and we can see from the impact assessment. Right now, it's too early to tell for us where we've got to. We're currently upgrading our CRM system so that we can essentially do exactly that. We can not only analyze exactly how well we've taken people on this journey and accelerated that pathway, but we can also support them with targeted comms. So, resources to remove some of those barriers to pledging, whether it's, I don't know, fantastic videos on how to service your bike, whether it's vegan recipes, whether it's inviting them to online community groups. But we're currently in the process of evaluating what might be the best ways. And I suspect that there won't just be one answer, it'll be different for different people. And so we'll be offering a lot of them. But that's certainly the way we're going.
Yeah, something that we find from our work is exactly what you say. There's different people will do different things at different times. And it's really tempting to want one answer for what to do, and it won't work like that. So I'm looking forward to the results of that. Right, Stuart is giving me the 2-minute warning. So I'll just give you last question, Katie, it's one from Robert. I'll just read it out. Many of the young people that we run sessions with love football. And we often end up playing football in between science engagement. So football's just a thing that people do, in between other stuff with young people. Any advice for using football or other sports as a fun way to engage young people, in particular, with climate or nature?
This is a really interesting one. I mean, I think I would suggest using our mechanism that exists. You could have an event on that day. So if you are holding a one-off event, you could say, well, I've set this up. Let's see how much you're willing to collectively pledge to save together. And they could all engage with that. Or you could split them into separate teams, and you could enable them to each have their own listing. So they could generate their own logo. They start to take ownership of it then. The logo gets uploaded to the website. They can write their own event description, and they decide how they're best going to encourage their peers, their friends, their families to also pledge in support of their club. But the key thing there is allowing them to take ownership of it, because they can run with it then in whatever way they want, and they are much more emotionally engaged. So I think that would be my recommendation for including it in there. It doesn't even need to be football specific, but we know that the highs and lows that come with emotion make this kind of engagement much more likely.
Perfect answer. Perfect timing. Thank you, everyone, so much for your time. It's time to go. Be free, go off to your next session. Katie, thank you so much. Stuart has been putting links in the chat. If you check out pledgeball.org and climateoutreach.org, you'll find more information on our work together and on our respective organisations. And a virtual round of applause for you, Katie. Thank you for all of your work.
Thank you for sharing, David. I'll see you again.
Thanks, everyone.